Welcome to the first ever Monday Mobile Edits episode. And today we're going to do kind of a product style shot. Now, the idea with this particular series is that I'm taking photos on my iPhone and then editing them using Apple Photos and ON1 Photo Raw. What you can see here is I have the Canon RF 100 to 400 lens on my Canon R6, and this is kind of just one of those I guess lifestyle product shots outdoors on a tree stump in a walking trail. So I think the star of the show is really just the combination of the Canon R6 and the Canon RF 100 to 400. I'm going to start this edit using Apple Photos, but I did take this with my iPhone, and I am on the Mac, which, it just works out great. But the very first thing that I'll do is probably modify the light a little bit. And if you're not familiar with Apple Photos, then I'll kind of walk you through that as well, and you'll get familiar with it throughout the series as I release it. So to modify the light in this image, I'm going to come over to the right adjustment pane. And on the top here, this is kind of like the AI auto that we're used to in ON1. If I drag this to the left, you can see what's happening with the sliders down underneath. And if I drag it to the right, back and forth, all that good stuff, right? Now, what I want to do is drag this to the left because I want to darken the image overall and give it kind of that look of more contrast, because that's what I want to do with this particular shot. If I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see that it is a minor adjustment, but minor adjustments go a long way, especially since I know I'm going to drop this into ON1 Photo Raw for a little bit more editing. Now, I'm going to come down to the color section, and I can do the same thing. If I drag this to the left, you can see this really only modifies the saturation, and then at a certain point, it grabs the vibrance if I pull over to the right. But what I found is I personally just want to add a little bit of vibrance and maybe just a little bit of a cast. And this gives me that overall look, right? So whenever I work inside of Apple Photos, since I don't have a way of making selective adjustments or masking in my adjustments, I have to use what's known as global adjustments, and that's okay, but I'm really just trying to set the canvas for what I want to do when I get into ON1. Everything else I think I'm going to leave alone. And now it's time to jump over to ON1 for some more editing. Now to do that, you'll hit these little three dots, and you can see I have a few different programs that I could send this to edit in. Pixelmator Pro would probably be a good one for this as well, and maybe I'll do that in a later video. But today we're just going to go into ON1 Effects 2023. Now, quick note about ON1 Effects. If you do not have the plugin package, meaning you're not subscribed or you didn't purchase the standalone plugins, you're not going to be able to do it this way. However, what you can do is export this to a JPEG and then open that with ON1 Photo Raw, and you can get the same outcome that I have. But I'm just going to go ahead and click ON1 Effects, and this is just telling me once I get done, it's going to turn off the live photo view, which is okay with me. And then what it's going to do is move this over to ON1 Effects, so that way I can start editing. Okay, so here we are inside of ON1 Effects 2023 with our base canvas with the Apple Photos adjustments made to it. Now, what I really want to do is draw attention to this particular camera with the background being a little blurred out, or I'm sorry, not blurred out, but darker. So I'm going to do that with a local adjustment because that's just how I like to work whenever I deal with that type of lighting effect. And what I'm going to do is hit the letter M on the keyboard. I'm going to grab the masking bug, and I'm going to select vignette. And then what I want to do is put this around the edges. So I'm just going to click there, or I'm sorry, I need to click center. That's very confusing, but whatever. So what I'm going to do is rotate this just a little bit and pull this out. We'll come down here And then I am going to kind of nudge this in just a touch. All right. And maybe even more. Maybe we'll do it something like this. And then I'll just fade it this way. That way, now the attention is more on the camera. And I'll just pull down on the exposure here a touch. And I think that's pretty good. Now, what I noticed when I was actually working inside of Apple Photos is I put a little bit of a color cast over the Canon logos here, the Canon logo and then the EOS marker. So what I'm going to do is create another adjustment. Now, I should have added in a label for that, but I didn't. And I am going to pull down on the saturation this time, just a touch here, maybe about 14. And using the adjustment brush, I am just going to paint over this. And what that's going to do is take away some of that color cast that we're seeing there. And I'm not seeing that take as much effect as I would like, so I'm just going to pull that down even more. And if I turn this off and on, you can see that color cast, it just disappears. So let me zoom in just so that way it looks, you can see the effect happening a little bit better. All right, so right now it's turned off, and if I turn it back on, you can see how that's really working for those areas. Now it is desaturating a little bit around the camera or on the camera in the black areas. So if you really had to, what you could do is you can try using the blending options here. So maybe I want to take it out of the shadowed areas, and now it's only affecting the brighter areas. All right. So, and I could probably pull that up a little bit more and it'll really fine tune it. But the goal is really just to make that area pop. And what I'll also do, since I desaturated it, is I will increase the whites, and that'll really make that area stand out a little bit better. Then I'll just take my brush tool again, and we'll just paint over this area right here. And I'm doing this in click motions just because it could build up, and I think that that works a little bit better. So if I turn this off and turn it back on, you can see I eliminated that cast. Now, we'll go ahead and zoom back out. So we'll fit this back to the screen. And I think that that's going to work out just fine for us for right now. This is the before and the after so far. Before and after. So now we got some weird green colors in the background. I think those need to be dealt with. What I'm going to do is use another local adjustment. This time I'm going to use the color range mask, and I'm just going to grab my eye picker tool here and click in that green yellow area. But I don't think that that quite got it. So I'm going to try again. And this time I'll click here. Nope. This just isn't getting the area that I want. There we go. I think that that'll be a better selection. So if I pull this down, and if I hit the letter O, I can see what I'm selecting. I'm just going to pull this up. I think that's getting all of that color. We'll just feather this a little bit because whenever you make these types of selections, it does get a little harsh. And I just want that to fade a little bit more. But my goal is not to pull down the exposure. It's instead, I want to pull down, I want to modify the color. So I'm going to pull down on the saturation just a little bit here. I think that that works. And maybe the vibrance. Now, what's important to note is this is an 8-bit file that I'm working on. So there's going to be banding. It is usually better to work in a 16-bit workspace, but the file itself was an 8-bit file. So that's going to limit how well I can push things, right? And this is why we shoot raw in most cases, but that's okay. So now what I think we ought to do is really enhance this main product. And there are a ton of ways that you can enhance the main product. But what I think I can do here is give this a dodge burn effect where it really kind of stands out from the background, because we've already lowered the exposure all around it. So it's kind of like this contrast effect that's happening. But I think if I add in a little bit of a dodging and burning effect. So the way that I do that is I'm just going to pull down on the exposure, and I will make my brush size a little bit larger, and I am going to paint this over just like so. And I know that right now I am burning essentially the entire lens, and that's okay, because what I'm going to do is come over to the blend options. I'm going to pull this away from the highlights. All right. And that's going to allow me to really just let the brightest area shine through. Now, that's not actually working the way that I was expecting it to work. So let's go with our apply to area, and let's click on apply to shadows. All right. So now turning that off and on, you can see how that's just contouring the lens a little bit more and making it look more appealing. Now, I can increase the shadow range if I wanted to, or I could decrease it, which I think I need to play with this a little bit to get it right where it ought to be. I think that'll work. And then I'm going to pull down on the blacks, because this should be a fairly black lens. And then I'll even pull down on the exposure a little bit more. So now if I turn this off and on, you can see I'm just starting to get a little bit more directional lighting. Now I just need to do the opposite for the highlights in the image by hitting add adjustment. And then I am going to come over here, and instead of using the exposure, I'm going to use highlights. Now, the reason is whenever I'm working with highlights, I like to be as subtle as possible, because it's okay if I have more black pixels in my image. It's not as okay if I have a bunch of bright pixels in my image. So all I'm going to do is take this and paint all the way over this area. And let me hit the letter O, see what I got. And there's some highlights up here, so I really want to get those. Let me make this a little bit smaller and paint over this area. And then I'm going to increase my highlight adjustment here. And I may just throw in a little bit of exposure. All right. That's just going to make things a little bit brighter. Maybe throw in some structure, because the brighter areas should be a little bit more structured. But here's where I think the trick kind of comes in. Using the blend options, what I'm going to do is come down to overlay or soft light. And I think that this just adds a nice little touch. All right. Now, on normal, it brightens up everything. Overlay or soft light just gives a little bit of contrast. I could even go with hard light if I really wanted like some more dramatic look, but I don't think I want a more dramatic look. So I think I'll go with overlay on this particular image, but I'm going to pull this away from the shadows, so I'm only impacting those highlights. And then I'll probably even come over here and drop this. I don't think that that's working the way that I expected it to. So we'll leave it on all, but I'm getting a little bit of a color cast. So what I really need to do is come over here and drop the saturation, so that way I don't get that color cast that I was getting. And I need to change the blend mode to something like luminosity probably. So let's do that, because that will probably do a better job at what I want to do. And then we'll just target the highlights and maybe pull up on the range until I start to get the adjustment where I want it. Yeah, lots of trial and error here, but what it's essentially doing is enhancing those little spots and making the lens look a little bit more contoured. It's subtle adjustments that make good images. Now, the last thing that I'll probably do to this photo, and I promise I will hold true to making this the last thing, is I'll probably come over to the effects and maybe throw a bleach bypass on this. And what that does is it really contrasts the image the way that I like my images to be contrasted. But it could be a little heavy-handed right now. So what I'm going to do is just pull this down because I'm going for like a lifestyle product shot here. I'll just pull this down just a little bit in the opacity and maybe just brighten. No, I don't think brightening works. So let's go with a little bit more darkening or pulling down on the brightness, and let's contrast it a little bit more. I think that works out quite well for this overall image. And I know I said I was going to try and keep it to one last thing, but I feel like I could do something with these browns, and that's what I want to kind of mess around with and see what I can do. So let me, yeah. So if I pull up on the saturation here, I wonder if I can darken them. And this just helps with making that moody look overall, right? Saturate them a little bit more, but make it a darker looking tone. I'm using the orange range here. I could probably come into the reds and maybe make those a little bit brighter or darker. I'm not entirely sure which way I want to go with that. But that just helps with adding in a little bit of structure around the outside of the image and balancing the colors in the overall image. So here is what we came into ON1 Photo Raw with, straight out of Apple Photos. And then after all of our local adjustments and our adjustment here, you can see we came in with this particular look. Again, I'm using ON1 effects. You could do this as well using ON1 Photo Raw, but I just wanted to show how I can get from Apple Photos into here. And that's kind of going to be the workflow that I use with all of the mobile photography that I'm going to be editing. If you got questions about what I did here or just the workflow in general, drop it in the comment section below. I would love to hear about that. Also, if you shoot mobile photography using an iPhone, are you using Apple Photos to do a base edit, either on your phone or in the computer? Let me know in the comment section below. Now, if you want to pick up ON1 Photo Raw effects or ON1 Photo Raw, then consider using the coupon code FreeWillPhotos20 to save 20% at checkout. Until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.